I folded the marriage registration form in half, tore it down the middle, and dropped both pieces on the floor of the empty Civil Affairs Bureau office. "Sir, you can't," the clerk started. "She's not coming," I said, already turning toward the exit. "Cancel everything." The clerk's voice faded behind me as I pushed through the glass doors into the afternoon heat. My phone buzzed for the 14th time. I didn't need to look to know it was another message from Jessica's friends, each one a variation of "she's on her way" or "just wait a little longer." 3 hours. I'd waited 3 hours past our appointment time, watching other couples come and go, their faces bright with futures they believed in. The clerk had been patient, then sympathetic, then uncomfortable. When Jessica's best friend Emma finally called instead of texting, I knew. "Michael, listen. Where is she?" The pause told me everything. She had to meet someone. It was urgent. "She'll be there soon, I promise." "Who did she have to meet on our registration day, Emma?" Another pause. "Daniel's in town. He's leaving tomorrow for Singapore. She just needed to..." I ended the call and asked the clerk if I could still cancel. The way she looked at me, that mixture of pity and relief that she wouldn't have to witness whatever came next, made my decision feel less like a choice and more like the only rational response to information I should have processed months ago. Daniel, her college ex-boyfriend, the one she described as just a friend now whenever his name appeared on her phone screen, which had been happening with increasing frequency over the past 6 months. The same Daniel whose visit to our city 2 months ago had resulted in Jessica canceling our dinner reservation because he's only here for 1 night and we haven't caught up in years. I'd said it was fine. I'd meant it at the time. Or maybe I'd just been practicing the same lines I'd eventually perfect. "It's fine. It doesn't bother me. I trust you." By the time I reached my apartment, I'd already opened the browser on my phone and searched for train tickets. The 11:40 p.m. sleeper to Chengdu had available berths. I booked one. My apartment was a 1-bedroom place in a decent neighborhood, close enough to my office that I could walk on pleasant mornings. Jessica had helped me pick it out 2 years ago, back when she talked about eventually moving in, about the 2nd bedroom in a bigger place we'd need someday. Her skincare products still cluttered the bathroom counter. Her spare clothes hung in my closet. A stack of her books sat on the nightstand. She was always starting books here and finishing them at her own place. I pulled my largest suitcase from the top shelf and began emptying my closet with mechanical efficiency. Clothes, documents, laptop. The framed photo on my desk of Jessica and me at the beach went face down in the trash. I'd taken that photo on a good day, one of those rare Sundays where her phone stayed in her bag and we existed in the same time zone as each other. My phone rang. Jessica. I declined the call and continued packing. She called again. Then Emma called. Then Jessica's mother called, which meant Jessica had deployed her entire network without ever bothering to come herself. I turned the phone off. The thing about discovering you're not someone's priority is that it recontextualizes everything. The birthday dinner she'd been 40 minutes late to because of an emergency work call, her laughter in the background had sounded remarkably social for a work crisis. The weekend trip she'd postponed 3 times before we finally canceled the bookings. The way she'd started every other sentence with "Daniel thinks" or "Daniel says," without seeming to notice the pattern. I'd accommodated it all because that's what you do when you love someone. You make space. You understand, you trust that you're building something that can withstand the occasional inconvenience. But there's a difference between occasional inconvenience and being the alternate plan someone keeps in reserve. Our marriage registration should have happened at 2 p.m. It was now 6:30 p.m. She hadn't just been late. She'd made a choice about whose time mattered more. The apartment looked strange as I moved through it, cataloging what to take and what to abandon. I'd lived here for 3 years, but I felt no attachment to the space. It was just walls and furniture, a place I'd been storing myself between the moments I'd believed were building toward something permanent. I left the keys on the kitchen counter, along with a note for the landlord about breaking the lease. I'd lose my deposit, but I had enough savings to absorb the loss. My job was remote by nature. I was a software systems architect, spending most of my time in video calls and virtual repositories. I could do that work from anywhere. I'd already sent my manager a brief email. Family Suwantli emergency. Working remotely from Chengdu indefinitely. Available on all normal channels. The streets were thick with evening traffic as I hauled my suitcase toward the subway. My phone, still powered off in my pocket, felt heavy with the weight of messages I'd never read. I imagined Jessica's explanation, whatever form it took. Some version of, "You're overreacting," or "If you'd just let me explain," or "I thought we were past jealousy." But this wasn't jealousy. Jealousy is a hot emotion, sharp and immediate. This was cold arithmetic. I'd finally calculated the sum of all the times I'd been the supporting character in someone else's story, and the total was too large to ignore. The subway car was half empty. I sat with my suitcase between my knees and watched the city blur past through the windows. I'd moved here 5 years ago for work, drawn by opportunities that had mostly materialized. I'd built a decent career. I'd made some friends, though most of them were really our friends. People who'd met me through Jessica, and who would naturally flow back into her orbit once I disappeared. The city had been good to me in the ways cities are good to people. It had asked nothing and given proportionally. At the train station, I bought a container of noodles from a vendor and ate while waiting for my departure track to be announced. The food was oversalted and the tea was too weak, but it filled the space where dinner should have been. Our reservation tonight had been at that Italian place Jessica loved, the one where we'd celebrated her promotion last year. I'd planned to give her the jade bracelet I'd bought from that antique dealer near my office. Something old, something that suggested permanence. The bracelet was still in my jacket pocket. I took it out and looked at it under the harsh station lights. It was beautiful in an understated way, the kind of beautiful that reveals itself slowly. I walked to a trash bin and held it suspended over the opening for a long moment before changing my mind and slipping it back into my pocket. I could sell it in Chengdu, or give it to my mother, or throw it in the river. The point was that it no longer had a designated recipient. Train K419 to Chengdu, now boarding on Platform 7. I'd been to Chengdu once for a conference, years before I'd met Jessica. I remembered it as a city of humid heat and exceptional food, wide boulevards, and a more relaxed pace than the coastal hustle I'd grown accustomed to. My mother had family there, distant cousins I'd met at weddings and funerals, but never knew well. It was far enough to constitute a clean break, but not so foreign that I'd be starting from absolute zero. The sleeper car was quiet, most passengers already tucked into their berths with curtains drawn. I had a lower berth, which meant less privacy but easier access. I stored my suitcase in the overhead space and sat on the edge of the thin mattress, finally turning my phone back on. 47 missed calls, 63 unread messages. I scrolled through them without opening any. Jessica's name appeared most frequently, but Emma, Jessica's mother, and several numbers I didn't recognize also made appearances. The desperation was palpable even through the notification previews. "Michael, please, we need to talk. You're being crazy. At least tell me you're safe. Daniel means nothing, I swear." That last one almost made me laugh. If Daniel meant nothing, why had he been worth more than our marriage registration? Why had Jessica chosen to prioritize his farewell over our beginning? I typed out a single message to my mother. Taking a break from the city, coming to Chengdu for a while. We'll call you tomorrow. Then I turned the phone off again and slid it under my pillow. The train lurched into motion, that slow gathering of momentum that feels almost reluctant before the speed builds and the city starts falling away. I lay back on the mattress and watched the lights outside my window transform from distinct points into continuous streams of color. I didn't feel angry. That was the strangest part. I'd expected rage, heartbreak, the kind of emotional devastation that marks the end of a 3-year relationship. Instead, I felt lighter, the relief of no longer having to wonder if I was enough, if I was being unreasonable, if my concerns were valid, or evidence of insecurity. The answer had been delivered with perfect clarity. I was the person someone could leave waiting at the Civil Affairs Bureau for 3 hours while she prioritized someone else. The birth curtain across from mine twitched open. An elderly man with impressive eyebrows peered out. "Can't sleep either?" "Just thinking," I said. He nodded sagely, as if this explained everything. "Traveling alone?" "Yes." "Good time of year for Chengdu. The hot pot is excellent in autumn." He paused, studying my face in the dim light. "Running from something or toward something. Does it matter?" "Not particularly. Either way, you're moving. That's what counts." He smiled and withdrew behind his curtain. I'd met Jessica at a friend's wedding 3 years ago. She'd been sitting at the singles table, a cruel tradition that somehow persists, looking bored and beautiful in a blue dress that made her look like she'd stepped out of a different, more elegant era. I'd made some joke about the chicken being dry enough to violate the Geneva Convention, and she'd laughed, and that was enough to start. The first year had been good, better than good. She was smart and funny and had opinions about everything from municipal policy to the correct way to fold dumplings. She worked in marketing for a pharmaceutical company and was ambitious in ways I found attractive. She knew what she wanted and moved toward it with purpose. The second year had been where the patterns started emerging, though I'd been too invested to name them. Her phone always present at dinner, her distraction during conversations, as if part of her existed in a parallel dialogue I wasn't privy to. The way she'd light up when certain people messaged her and dim when it was just us in a room. Daniel had appeared, or reappeared, about 6 months into our second year. An old friend, she'd said. Someone from college she'd lost touch with who'd reached out through social media. They'd dated briefly, years ago, but it had ended amicably and they'd stayed friends. I'd had no reason to object. I wasn't the jealous type, didn't believe in restricting who my partner could befriend. And at first, it had seemed innocent enough. Occasional messages. A phone call here and there. Jessica mentioning something funny Daniel had said, but frequency has a way of shifting context. The occasional became regular. The regular became constant. And somewhere along the way, I'd become the person who was expected to understand why I couldn't be the priority. The train settled into its rhythm, that particular clickety-clack that sounds like a metronome for insomnia. Could hear someone snoring 3 berths down. A baby cried briefly before being soothed. Life continuing in small, contained dramas. I pulled out my laptop and opened my work email. Might as well be productive with the sleeplessness. I had a system design due in 3 days and a backlog of code reviews. The work was familiar, comforting in its logical structure. If X, then Y. Clear inputs, predictable outputs. Nothing like human relationships, where you could input years of devotion and get absence as an output. Somewhere around midnight, I finally dozed off, my laptop still open on my chest, my dreams fragmented and unmemorable. I woke to daylight streaming through gaps in the curtain and the smell of instant noodles being prepared in the dining car. My neck ached from the angle I'd slept at, and my laptop had slid onto the mattress beside me. I checked the time, 7:23 a.m. We'd be in Chengdu in about an hour. My phone showed another accumulation of messages, but also one from my mother. "Your cousin Robert says you can stay with him if you need a place. I told him you were coming. He's excited to see you. Call me." Robert. I had vague memories of a thin kid with glasses at my uncle's funeral, maybe 8 years ago. He'd be in his late 20s now, probably married with kids, living the life everyone was supposed to want. But the offer of a place to stay was generous, and I'd accept it at least temporarily while I figured out something more permanent. I composed a response to my mother. "Thanks, Mom. We'll call Robert when I arrive. Don't worry about me. I'm fine." The lie in that last sentence felt necessary. I wasn't fine, but I would be, and the path from here to there didn't require burdening my mother with details about Jessica's choices. Chengdu announced itself gradually through the window. The landscape shifted from rural to industrial to suburban to urban, buildings growing denser and taller, the sky taking on that particular haze that marks large Chinese cities. The train slowed, stopped, started again, navigating the complex choreography of arrival. When we finally pulled into Chengdu East Railway Station, I felt the finality of the decision I'd made. This was real. I'd actually left. I'd torn up the marriage registration form and gotten on a train, and now I was somewhere else, someone else, a version of Michael who didn't wait around to be deprioritized. The station was massive and crowded, full of people moving with purpose toward destinations I'd never know. I hauled my suitcase through the terminal and out into the humid autumn air. Chengdu felt different from the coastal city I'd left. Slower, somehow, despite the crowds, as if operating on a different internal clock. I found a coffee shop and ordered something that approximated an Americano. The barista looked about 19 and seemed personally offended by my existence before 9 a.m. I sympathized. I called Robert. "Michael, Mom said you were coming. Where are you?" His voice was warm, enthusiastic in a way that suggested either genuine excitement or excellent manners. "Just arrived. I'm at the train station." "Stay there. I'll come get you. Give me 40 minutes. There's a Luckin Coffee on the second floor. Wait there." I found the Luckin Coffee and ordered a second coffee I didn't need. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Jessica. I watched her name flash on the screen until it went to voicemail. She called again immediately. I powered the phone off. Robert arrived in 35 minutes, which I respected. He was tall and wore the kind of business casual that suggested he worked in tech or finance, and his handshake was firm enough to communicate competence without aggression. "You look terrible," he said cheerfully. "Train sleep." "Right. Come on, I'm parked illegally." His car was a modest domestic brand sedan, clean inside except for a child's car seat in the back. "Didn't know you had kids," I said. "Daughter, Amy. She's too and a tyrant." He navigated through traffic with the confidence of someone who'd made peace with chaos. "Mom didn't tell me much, just that you needed a change of scenery." Something like that. He glanced at me, clearly curious but respectful enough not to push. "Well, you're welcome to stay as long as you need. We've got a spare room. My wife Linda's a lawyer, works long hours, so it's usually just me and Amy until evening. You like toddlers? Never spent much time with them. You'll learn. She's surprisingly good at teaching life lessons. Yesterday she taught me that wanting something and getting something are different concepts. I smiled despite myself. Wise? Terrifying is what she is. But you'll see. Robert's apartment was in a newer development on the south side of the city, one of those compounds with a name like Distinguished Garden or Prosperity Heights. His unit was on the 8th floor, spacious and bright, with toys scattered strategically throughout like small plastic landmines. A woman emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. Linda, presumably. She was petite, with short hair, and the assessing eyes of someone accustomed to evaluating credibility for a living. Michael, Roberts told me about you. Well, told me you existed. This visit was a surprise. Appreciate you having me on short notice. She waved this away. We've got space. Just help out with Amy when you can. She's at her grandmother's today, but normally she's here trying to renegotiate bedtime like it's a contract dispute. She paused. You need anything? Food, rest, someone to murder on your behalf? Linda's kidding, Robert said quickly. Mostly. I'm a lawyer. I know how to make things look accidental, Linda said, deadpan. Then she smiled. But seriously, you look like you've been through something. You don't have to talk about it, but if you need anything, we're here. The spare room was small, but functional, with a twin bed and a desk and a window that looked out over the compound's central garden. I unpacked my suitcase, hanging clothes in the narrow closet and arranging my laptop on the desk. The room smelled faintly of fresh paint, as if it had recently been repurposed. I sat on the bed and powered on my phone one more time. The messages had reached triple digits. I scrolled through enough to get the narrative. Jessica was sorry. She'd made a mistake. Daniel was leaving, and it was the last time she'd see him, and she'd lost track of time. It wasn't what I thought. Could we please talk like adults? That last phrase, like adults, almost got a response. As if the adult thing was to accept being abandoned at the Civil Affairs Bureau. As if maturity meant accommodating someone who'd demonstrated exactly how little your shared commitments meant to her. I opened a new message to Jessica and typed, "Don't contact me again. We're done. I've left the city. Get your things from the apartment. I've forwarded your number to the landlord." I hit send before I could reconsider, then blocked her number, then blocked Emma, then blocked Jessica's mother for good measure. The phone felt lighter in my hand. For the next 3 days, I settled into a strange new routine. I worked from Robert's apartment, taking video calls in the spare room and cranking out code with the focused intensity of someone trying not to think. Amy came home and proved to be exactly as advertised. A tiny dictator with strong opinions about which toys belonged where and how stories should be read, with voices for every character, no exceptions. Again, she'd demand, when I finished reading about the caterpillar that ate through various foods. We've read it 4 times. Again, there was something clarifying about her unambiguous demands. She wanted what she wanted and expressed it without guilt or manipulation. No subtext, no hidden meanings, just pure, uncomplicated desire and disappointment. Robert and Linda asked no questions about why I'd appeared in their lives with one suitcase and a haunted look. They simply made space for me, included me in meals, let me be alone when I needed it. On the 4th night, over hot pot that burned my mouth and cleared my sinuses, Robert finally broached the subject. "So, you planning to stay in Chengdu?" "Thinking about it. My work's remote, can do it from anywhere." Must have been something significant to pick up and move overnight. I considered how much to share. These people were family in the technical sense, but strangers in practice. But something about Linda's direct gaze and Robert's patient silence made me want to tell the truth. or at least a version of it. Was supposed to register for marriage. She didn't show up. She was with her ex-boyfriend. I tore up the registration form and caught a train. The silence that followed was heavy with judgment, though not directed at me. Jesus, Linda said finally. She didn't show up to your marriage registration? She said it was urgent, that he was leaving the country the next day. And she chose saying goodbye to him over registering her marriage to you, Robert said slowly, as if processing the logic and finding it incomprehensible. That about covers it. Linda set down her chopsticks with deliberate care. Michael, I say this as someone who evaluates decisions for a living. You did the right thing. That's not a mistake or a miscommunication. That's a clear statement of priorities. That's what I figured. Has she tried to contact you? Robert asked. Blocked her number. Blocked all of them. Linda nodded approvingly. Good. Clean break. You start negotiating and you'll end up convinced you overreacted, and 6 months from now you'll be right back in the same pattern. Speaking from experience? I asked. I'm a divorce lawyer. I see what happens when people ignore obvious red flags because they're invested in a particular outcome. It never gets better. It just gets more expensive to extract yourself later. Amy, who'd been coloring at the other end of the table, suddenly looked up. Sad? We all turned to her. She was looking at me with that unnervingly direct stare that small children deploy. I'm okay, I told her. Hug? Before I could respond, she'd climbed down from her chair and toddled over to wrap her small arms around my leg. The gesture was so unexpected and pure that I felt something crack in my chest, some defensive wall I'd been maintaining since I'd folded that registration form in half. Thanks, Amy. She nodded seriously, as if she'd just completed an important task, then returned to her coloring. Robert cleared his throat. So, if you're staying, we should help you find a place. Can't live in our spare room forever. Linda's planning to convert it into her home office. I'm not pushing you out, Linda interjected. But yes, eventually I need the space. Take your time, though. Few weeks at least. Appreciate it. I'll start looking. Over the next 2 weeks, I fell into the rhythm of Chengdu. The city revealed itself in layers. The obvious tourist attractions I mostly ignored, the neighborhood restaurants where I became a regular, the parks where elderly people practiced Tai Chi while their grandchildren played. I found an apartment in a slightly older building near People's Park, small but well lit, with enough space for my minimal possessions and my expanding collection of Chengdu street food recommendations. Work continued without interruption. My manager asked no questions about my location change, caring only that my commits were timely and my code reviews thorough. I attended stand-ups from 8 hours behind most of my teammates, participated in design discussions, met my deadlines. The company had been remote-friendly before the pandemic and fully distributed after. My physical location was irrelevant as long as the work got done. I'd unblocked Jessica's number after a week, curious to see if she'd continued trying to reach me. She had, for about 5 days, each message growing more desperate, and then angry, and then resigned. The last one, from 8 days ago, read, I hope you're happy with yourself. You just threw away 3 years over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. As if the problem was my interpretation rather than her choice. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't extend a conversation that had already ended. She'd get her closure, or she wouldn't. Either way, it wasn't my responsibility to provide it. One Saturday morning, about 3 weeks after I'd arrived in Chengdu, I was having breakfast at a small noodle shop near my new apartment when someone sat down across from me. I looked up, irritated at the presumption there were other empty tables, and found myself looking at a woman about my age with paint on her hands and an expectant expression. You're the guy from Building 7, right? I've seen you coming and going. Maybe. I'm in Building 6. Artist. Terrible with names, but good with faces. You're new. About 3 weeks. She ordered noodles from the hovering owner and turned back to me. Running from or toward? I must have looked startled because she laughed. Sorry, I ask everyone that. It's a thing. I'm running toward, in case you're wondering. Came here to study traditional painting techniques. Ended up staying because the light is better than Beijing and the rent is cheaper. Toward, I guess, I said, surprising myself with the honesty. Or maybe away from and accidentally toward something else. That's how it usually works. I'm Wei Lin, by the way. Michael. Foreign name? Born abroad? Born in Hangzhou. Parents had ambitions. Did it work? The ambitions? Yeah. Are you suitably ambitious? I considered this. I build systems for a living. Software architecture. It pays well and I'm good at it, but I wouldn't call it ambitious. More like competent. Competent is underrated. Ambition makes people do stupid things. Her noodles arrived, and she attacked them with unself-conscious enthusiasm. Like my ex-boyfriend who moved to Shanghai to make it in finance and now works 18-hour days for the privilege of hating his life in a more expensive city. Dodged a bullet? More like dodged a whole firing squad. She paused. What about you? What bullet did you dodge? Who says I dodged anything? You've got the look, that fresh-wound clarity, like you just extracted yourself from something, and you're still processing whether it was surgery or amputation. I should have been annoyed by her presumption, but something about her directness was refreshing. No polite dance around the subject, no careful probing, just straight to the point. Marriage registration that didn't happen. She chose to be elsewhere. Ouch! Wei Lin didn't offer platitudes or apologies, just acknowledgement. Recent? 3 weeks. So this is you rebuilding. Smart to change cities. Too easy to fall back into patterns otherwise. You sound experienced. 2 bad relationships and 1 excellent therapist. I've learned things. She finished her noodles and stood. I'm having some people over tomorrow night. Other artists, couple of musicians, pretty casual. Come if you want. Building 6, apartment 402, around 8. She left before I could decline, which meant I spent the next 30 hours debating whether to go. Social interaction felt exhausting, but isolation felt worse. And there was something appealing about meeting people who knew nothing about Jessica, who had no context for the person I'd been before I'd torn up that form and left. I showed up at 8:15 with a bottle of wine I'd agonized over selecting, worried it would be too cheap or too expensive, or the wrong variety. Wei Lin answered the door in paint-splattered overalls and bare feet. Michael, you came. Wine, excellent. Come in. Her apartment was larger than mine and infinitely more chaotic. Canvases leaned against every wall, some finished and some in progress. The air smelled of oil paint and incense, and something cooking that might have been dumplings. About a dozen people occupied various surfaces, perched on chairs and floor and windowsills, engaged in overlapping conversations. Wei Lin pulled me into the chaos, with the same casual confidence she'd displayed at breakfast. Everyone, this is Michael. He's new. Be nice. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of introductions and conversations that ranged from heated debates about contemporary art movements to someone's disastrous attempt to learn the Gucheng. I mostly listened, contributing when directly addressed, but content to observe this ecosystem of creative people who seemed to have built lives around making things rather than optimizing systems. A musician named David, or possibly Kevin, I'd already lost track of names, cornered me near midnight. Wei Lin says you just moved here. What brings you to Chengdu? Works remote. Seemed like a good change. Running from something? I laughed. Why does everyone ask that? Because it's usually true. Also, Wei Lin trained us to ask. She believes in direct communication as a moral imperative. I'm noticing that. So, running from what? Maybe it was the beer or the late hour or the fact that this stranger would forget the conversation by morning, but I found myself telling the story again. The registration, the absence, the form torn in half, the train to Chengdu. David listened without interruption, then said, "You did the right thing. Clean break. No ambiguity. My ex and I did the slow fade, kept trying to make it work. 6 months of misery before we finally admitted it was over. Would have been better to just rip the bandage off." That's what someone else told me. Because it's true. People want closure and negotiation and understanding, but sometimes the situation is just clear, and the only thing left to do is act on that clarity. Wei Lin materialized beside us. Are you two solving the mysteries of human relationships? Trying to, David said. So far, we've concluded that most people should communicate better and act faster. Revolutionary, Wei Lin said dryly. She turned to me. You look exhausted. Go home, sleep. Come back next week. We're doing hot pot. I took the dismissal for what it was. Permission to leave without awkwardness. The walk back to my building was short enough to feel safe and long enough to clear my head. The night air was cool and the streets were quiet. Just the occasional taxi and the distant sound of someone's television through an open window. My apartment felt less empty when I got back, as if the evening had somehow changed its character. I'd made friends, or at least friendly acquaintances. I'd told my story to strangers who'd validated my decision without knowing me or Jessica or any of the context. I'd existed for several hours as just Michael, not Michael who was left at the registration, or Michael who tore up the form. I checked my email before bed and found one from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "From Emma." I should have deleted it unread, but curiosity won. The message was short. "Michael, I know you blocked everyone and I respect that. I'm using my work email because I think you deserve to know this. Jessica and Daniel are together now. Like, officially together. She moved into his place when he got back from Singapore. I thought you should know so you're not wondering. I'm sorry for everything. You deserved better. Emma. I read it twice, waiting for the surge of pain or anger or regret. Instead, I felt vindicated. My instincts had been correct. The choice Jessica made that day hadn't been a momentary lapse in judgment. It had been a revelation of existing truth. She'd been choosing Daniel all along. The registration had simply forced her to make that choice explicit. I typed a brief response. Thanks for letting me know. I hope you're well. Then I deleted Emma's work email address from my contacts, so I wouldn't be tempted to maintain even that tenuous connection to my past life. The jade bracelet was still in my desk drawer, wrapped in tissue paper. I took it out and looked at it one final time, then packaged it carefully and addressed it to my mother with a note. For you, or for whichever relative gets married next. It was supposed to be for Jessica, but she had other plans. Love, Michael. I mailed it the next morning on my way to breakfast at the noodle shop. The old woman at the post office accepted the package with the same indifference she probably brought to all transactions, which felt appropriate. It was just an object, being transferred from one location to another. No drama, no significance beyond the physical fact of its movement through space. Wei Lin was at the noodle shop when I arrived, sketching something in a worn notebook. She looked up as I sat down. You look better. Better than what? Better than yesterday, Less haunted. More present. Got some information last night. Confirmed what I suspected. About the girl who didn't show up? She's with him now. The guy she went to see instead of registering our marriage. Wei Lin nodded slowly. So you were right to leave? Yeah. How does that feel? Honestly? Relieving. Better to be right about ending it than wrong about trying to save it. That's healthy. Took me 6 months to reach that conclusion about my ex. She returned to her sketching. You should come to the studio tomorrow. Some of us work there during the day. It's quiet, good if you need to focus on work. Better than being alone in your apartment. I might take you up on that. And I did. The studio was a converted warehouse space in an older industrial area, divided into semi-private work areas by repurposed furniture and hanging sheets. Wei Lin painted in one corner, David worked on music composition in another, and several other artists worked on projects I didn't fully understand, but found visually interesting. I set up my laptop at an empty desk and worked through my queue of code reviews while surrounded by people making things. There was something energizing about it. The ambient creativity, the way people would occasionally wander over to look at each other's work and offer thoughts. It was collaborative without being intrusive, communal without being obligatory. By the end of my second month in Chengdu, I'd established a life that bore little resemblance to the one I'd left. I worked from the studio most days. I attended Wei Lin's weekly gatherings. I explored the city methodically, trying new restaurants and walking through neighborhoods I had no reason to visit. I video called my mother every Sunday and listened to her careful avoidance of any topic related to Jessica or marriage or my abrupt relocation. Robert and Linda invited me to dinner once a week, and Amy had decided I was Uncle Michael, despite no biological relationship justifying the title. I'd learned to read the Caterpillar book with appropriate voices. I'd learned that 2-year-olds have strong opinions about which shoes to wear, and that arguing with them is both futile and character building. You seem better, Linda observed one evening while Robert was putting Amy to bed. Less like someone who's fled a crime scene. Did I seem that bad? You seemed like someone who'd made a necessary but painful choice and was still processing whether you'd survived it. Now you seem like someone who's building something new. That's accurate? Good. You deserve that. She paused. Robert showed me your ex's social media. I hope that's not overstepping. What did it say? A lot of photos of her and Daniel. Very happy. Very, look at us being in love. Which I read as performative, but either way you definitely made the right call. Yeah, I know. And I did know. Every day that passed made it clearer that I'd extracted myself from something that would have eventually consumed years of my life in slow dissolution. Better the sharp pain of a clean break than the chronic ache of being someone's second choice. 3 months after I'd torn up the registration form, I was having coffee with Wei Lin at our usual noodle shop when she asked, "Do you ever regret it?" Leaving? Yeah. Do you wonder what would have happened if you'd stayed, tried to work it out? Sometimes, usually around 3 a.m. when sleep won't come, but then I remember that I was already trying to work it out for months. I was the only one compromising. That's not a relationship. That's a negotiation where only one party has leverage. Exactly. I stirred my coffee. What about you? Ever regret leaving Beijing? Only when I see photos of my favorite dumpling place and realize I can't just walk there. But otherwise, no. I left for the right reasons, and I arrived somewhere better. That's all you can ask for. What were the right reasons? My ex wanted me to get a real job, stop painting, use my degree for something practical. I chose painting, lost the boyfriend, gained a life I actually wanted to live. She smiled. Same as you, kind of. choosing yourself over someone else's version of what you should accept. Winter arrived, and Chengdu revealed itself in fog and humidity. I bought a proper coat. I discovered that Sichuan hot pot is even better in cold weather. I got promoted at work, which came with a raise that made my modest Chengdu lifestyle feel almost luxurious. I sent money to my parents, paid down debt, started saving with actual intention. Jessica sent one final message on New Year's Eve, 6 months after I'd left. I know you won't respond, but I want you to know I'm sorry. You were right. About everything. I hope you're happy. I didn't respond, but I also didn't block the number again. The message wasn't a request for anything. It was just a statement, an acknowledgement. And maybe that was enough. At Wei Lin's New Year's Eve gathering, someone asked me the question I'd been asked a dozen times. Running from or toward? I thought about it, really thought about it, before answering. Both. Running from something that wasn't working toward something that might. And? Wei Lin prompted. Is it? Working? I looked around the crowded apartment, at the people I'd come to know, at the life I'd built from one decisive moment and a train ticket. Yeah, I said. I think it is. At midnight, we all went up to the roof of Wei Lin's building and watched fireworks bloom over the city. Someone had brought champagne. Someone else had brought their guitar. Amy, who Robert and Linda had brought for the early part of the evening, was long since home and asleep. To new beginnings, Wei Lin said, raising her glass. To knowing when to leave, David added. To not waiting around for people who've already made their choice, Linda contributed. I raised my glass. To tearing up forms and catching trains. We drank, and the year turned over, and somewhere in a different city, Jessica was probably celebrating with Daniel, and none of it mattered anymore. I'd made my choice in that moment at the Civil Affairs Bureau, when I folded the registration form in half and tore it rather than waiting for an explanation I already understood. The best decisions are the ones that feel obvious in retrospect. I'd left because staying would have meant accepting that I was someone worth abandoning for a goodbye. And I'd arrived here, in this city, with these people, because I'd chosen to believe I deserved better than that. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was the life I'd chosen, actively and deliberately, in the moment when I stopped waiting and started moving. And that, I was learning, made all the difference.